The flames danced higher as my sister fed another page to the fire, her wine-stained smile gleaming in the orange light. 7 years of my soul, my dreams, my most intimate thoughts, all turning to ash in our mother's garden while she laughed. I am Elena Hargrove, and this is the story of how my sister tried to burn my future, and how I rebuilt it into something that would haunt her forever. Growing up in Edinburgh, we were always compared, always measured against each other like two competing performances on the same stage. Why cannot you be more like Valerie? Mother would sigh, watching my sister float through the room with that effortless confidence that seemed to bend everyone toward her orbit. Valerie is the pretty one, Father would mutter during family gatherings, as if beauty were a finite resource that had been completely allocated to one daughter. Valerie is the confident one, relatives would whisper, watching me retreat to corners with my books while she commanded center stage. I was the quiet sister, the writer, the dreamer who lived in margins and shadows. Valerie? She was everything loud and shiny. And she absolutely despised that I did not orbit around her like everyone else. When I received my acceptance letter to the University of Edinburgh's creative writing program, she rolled her eyes so dramatically, I thought they might detach from her skull entirely. A degree in scribbling, she announced to anyone who would listen, while I study business and actually prepare for the real world. But I did not care. For the first time in my life, I had found my sanctuary. Those 4 years at university became my resurrection. I filled 7 journals, thick leather-bound volumes that became my closest confidants. Every page pulsed with heartbreak and brilliance, grief and poetry, pain and transformation. I was writing myself into existence, word by agonizing word. The journals contained everything. My first heartbreak with a boy named Kieran who smelled like coffee and broken promises. The night I stayed awake until dawn writing a poem that made my professor weep. The devastating phone call when grandmother died. The euphoric moment when I realized I could actually be a writer, not just someone who scribbled in notebooks. I documented every feeling, every revelation, every moment of growth. Those journals were not just books. They were the archaeological record of my becoming. Until she stole that. Until she tried to erase me completely. The fire happened the night after our mother's funeral. We were both 36, both supposedly adults, both staying in our childhood home that felt like a museum of old wounds. The house creaked with memories and unspoken resentments, every room echoing with decades of comparison and competition. We had been drinking wine we did not want, pretending to grieve in the same language, when the familiar tension began creeping back into our interactions. Even in death, Mother had managed to divide us one final time, leaving Valerie the family business and me the house filled with books. She always knew you would amount to nothing, Valerie had slurred earlier, her words sharp enough to cut glass. That is why she left you the house, so you would have somewhere to hide when your writing fantasies collapsed. I had left the room then, unable to stomach another moment of her venom. In my haste, I abandoned my leather satchel on the sofa, the one containing my precious college journals, the ones I had just started adapting into a semi-autobiographical script about sisterhood and survival. When I returned downstairs 20 minutes later, the acrid smell of smoke made my heart stop. She was in the back garden, silhouetted against our mother's prized rose bushes, tossing pages into the old fire pit. My pages. My life. My soul, piece by piece, feeding the flames while she smiled like she was conducting a symphony of destruction. Let it go, Elena, she slurred, her voice thick with wine and malice. They are just your sad little scribbles. You never write about anyone but yourself anyway. Maybe now you will finally join the real world. 7 years of my most intimate thoughts. 7 years of growth and pain and revelation. 7 years of becoming myself, all crumbling to ash while my sister laughed. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not tackle her or try to save what remained. I just watched and decided, this ends here. That night, as she passed out in Mother's old chair, I sat in the garden and studied the ashes. Some pages had survived partially, fragments of sentences, half-burned words that looked like ancient artifacts. I collected every piece, every scrap, every charred memory, and I began to plan. For the next 2 years, I reconstructed those journals from memory. Every raw entry, every moment she had mocked, Every secret I had buried beneath her shadow. The process was excruciating, like performing surgery on my own heart, but I refused to let her theft stand. I remembered the night I wrote about feeling invisible at family dinners. I recalled the poem about siblings who compete instead of connect. I reconstructed the essay about living in someone else's spotlight, always the supporting character in my own family's story. But I did not just recreate the journals. I transformed them. I took every painful memory, every moment of her cruelty, every instance where she had made me feel small, and I turned it into art. Raw, unfiltered, devastating art. The play began as a whisper and grew into a roar. I called it Ashes of Her. A one-act production about two sisters. One invisible, one cruel. One desperate for attention, the other desperate for peace. The story followed their relationship from childhood through adulthood, culminating in a symbolic burning of the past, and a very literal bonfire that would change everything. I wrote the invisible sister as someone the audience would recognize. The quiet one who sees everything, who remembers everything, who carries the family's emotional weight while receiving none of its acknowledgement. I wrote the cruel sister as someone magnetic but hollow, someone who needed constant admiration to feel real. The climax centered around a moment of ultimate betrayal, when the cruel sister destroys something precious belonging to the invisible one, not out of accident or passion, but from pure, calculated malice. The final scene showed the invisible sister rising from those ashes, no longer willing to disappear. Every line was surgical in its precision. Every scene was designed to hold up a mirror to anyone who had ever used cruelty as currency. When I finished the script, I knew it was the best thing I had ever written. It pulsed with truth and pain and power, everything Valerie had tried to burn. I submitted it to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, the same city where I had discovered my voice all those years ago. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I cried for 3 hours straight, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of resurrection. Valerie had no idea what the play was actually about. She just saw the posters around town featuring my name in bold letters, and suddenly decided she wanted to be supportive. Finally, someone in the family made something worth watching, she announced, calling to demand tickets. I am so proud of you for actually finishing something. Her condescension was perfect. Exactly what I needed. I made sure she received a front row seat. Center position. Impossible to miss, impossible to hide from. The premiere night arrived with all the electricity of a lightning storm. The small theater was packed, every seat filled with strangers who had no idea they were about to witness a family's destruction played out under stage lights. I sat in the back, watching Valerie chat animatedly with the people around her, basking in her perceived connection to the evening's success. She wore her most dramatic dress, the red one that had always been her armor when she wanted to command attention. The lights dimmed. The curtain rose, and my revenge began to unfold. Act 1 introduced the sisters as children, the loud one who demanded constant applause, the quiet one who found solace in stories. Valerie laughed during these scenes, probably recognizing herself in the charismatic character, and missing entirely the subtle cruelties woven throughout. Act 2 explored their teenage years. The comparisons, the competitions, the way one sister's light seemed to require the other's darkness. I watched Valerie shift uncomfortably in her seat as the cruel sister's actions became less charming and more obviously destructive. But Act 3 was my masterpiece. The adult sisters, dealing with their mother's death. The wine. The tension. The satchel left behind. And then, the moment that had haunted my nightmares for 2 years. The actress playing the cruel sister, a brilliant young woman named Zara who had understood the role immediately, began feeding pages to a stage fire. Real pages. Real flames. The smell of smoke filling the theater as she smiled, that same wine-stained smile I remembered so well. There was a moment, a long, crystalline silence, when Zara looked directly at the front row and whispered the line I had written specifically for this moment. "Even if you burn my story, I will just write it again, louder." The audience was transfixed. I could feel their collective intake of breath, their recognition of something real and raw happening before their eyes. But I was watching Valerie, watching her face change as she realized what she was seeing, watching the recognition dawn like a terrible sunrise. watching her understand that every person in this theater was witnessing her cruelty, her pettiness, her desperate need to destroy what she could not control. Her face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: confusion, recognition, horror, shame, and finally, a kind of defeated rage. She looked around as if hoping to find an escape route, but there was nowhere to hide. She was trapped in the front row of her own judgment. The Invisible Sister's final monologue was devastating. A litany of all the small cruelties, all the moments of deliberate harm, all the ways one person can systematically erase another. But it ended with resurrection, with the burned woman rising from her own ashes, no longer willing to disappear. When the lights came up for the curtain call, the applause was thunderous. The entire audience rose to their feet. Critics in the crowd were already reaching for their phones. But Valerie did not clap. She did not stand. She did not wait for the post-show reception. She left alone, pushing through the crowd with her head down, that red dress now looking less like armor and more like a target. Just as I had planned. The reviews were extraordinary. A searing examination of family trauma. Hargrove has created something both intimate and universal. A masterclass in transforming pain into power. The play was optioned by a West End producer within a month. Theatre programs across Scotland began reaching out. I was invited to speak at conferences about adaptive writing, about finding your voice, about the alchemy of turning trauma into art. But the most satisfying response came in the form of silence. Valerie, who had spent our entire lives making sure everyone heard her opinion about everything, said nothing. No congratulations. No criticism. No acknowledgement at all. She had finally learned what it felt like to be invisible. I now teach storytelling workshops for women reclaiming their voices from silence. I help them understand that their stories matter, that their pain can become their power, that sometimes the people who try to erase us are simply afraid of what we might write. The workshop always begins with the same exercise. I ask each participant to think of a moment when someone tried to silence them. Then I ask them to write that moment as the opening scene of their own play. The results are always extraordinary. I do not own those original journals anymore. They exist now only in ashes and memory. But I own every word that rose from their destruction. I own the power of transformation. I own the knowledge that the people who try to burn our stories are usually afraid of the light they might cast. My relationship with Valerie exists now only in careful politeness during family emergencies. We speak when we must, smile when we cannot avoid it, and maintain the fiction of sisterhood for others' comfort. But I no longer write about her. I write past her. She taught me something valuable in that garden fire. The difference between destruction and transformation. She thought she was erasing me, but she was actually setting me free. The burned journals became a play. The play became a career. The career became a platform for helping others find their voices. And every time someone tells me they found courage in my story, every time a workshop participant stands up to read their own words aloud for the first time, every time the theater lights dim and my words come alive on stage, Valerie's fire burns a little brighter. Not as destruction, but as fuel. She tried to turn my dreams to ash. Instead, she taught me that sometimes you have to burn completely before you can rise. The phoenix, after all, was not born from safety. It was born from flames. And I am still burning. Still rising. Still writing myself into existence, one word at a time. Louder than ever before. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt erased or silenced, if you believe in the power of transforming pain into purpose, please subscribe to our channel. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, transformation, and the unbreakable human spirit. Because everyone deserves to rise from their ashes.